Our session today is Valuing OER in Tenure and Promotion, the Doer OER Contributions Matrix. I will let our speakers introduce themselves to you, so we'll get started then. Thank you.
Amanda, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Coolidge. I am the Director of Open Education at BC Campus, which is located on the traditional unceded territory of the Esquimalt and Songhees Nations of Algonquin-speaking peoples, also known as Victoria, British Columbia. And today I'm actually joining you from Mi'kmaq territory in Prince Edward Island, Canada. Andy.
Hi, I am Andrew McKinney. I am the OER coordinator at the City University of New York in the Office of Library Services at the central office. And my general place of business is on the unceded lands of the Lenni and Lenape people.
Awesome. Can you see the screen okay?
I can, yeah.
Great, okay. So if you're interested in following along with our presentation, you are welcome to do so by going to menti.com, and you can input the code 17359543. And this will allow you to also participate in the presentation as well. Andy, would you be able to put that into the chat? Thanks.
Doing it.
Okay. So that will go in the chat. We'll just keep going along here. All right, over to you.
Great. So Amanda and I are here today, both representing our individual institutions, but also representing a group called Doers, Doers 3, or just Doers. Generally, we just call it Doers, which stands for Driving OER for Sustainable Student Success. We are a collaborative of mostly folks like Amanda and I who are sort of administrators for large, either province or statewide systems or large university systems. We serve over 6 million students at 688 colleges. The map here on the left shows you the institutions that we generally, that we are a part of. You know, good chunk of the US, several different institutions in Texas, as it's, you know, its own place. And Ontario and BC. So we are always open to engaging more folks. So if you are someone who is operating up at that sort of like program administration for a large institution, you know, feel free to reach out to us. So the way we organize our work at Doers, which again, the basic sort of drive for Doers is like in the name, driving OER for sustainable student success, is to try to work through some problems that, you know, a lot of OER programs have, or not problems, at least, you know, issues that constantly come up, and leverage our systemness, as we like to say, leverage our sort of largeness as a way to sort of help approach those problems. So we've split ourselves out into working groups. There's a working group for research that's mainly working on trying to sort of find some commensurate research variables across institutions that allow us to pool our data to do, you know, more high-powered, more high-impact research work. There is an equity group that you may or may not have seen recently has published an equity rubric for how to produce, you know, OER programs that are focused on equity. And then our group that we represent is the Building Capacity Work Group. So the essential sort of charge of the Building Capacity Work Group is to sort of identify you know, persistent obstacles to sustainability for OER programs. So one of our first projects was about listing and fulfillment of OER in campus bookstores. There's a report out for that you can see at doers3.org. That you know, gives there was a survey for it, and then folks identifying what their problems were with the bookstore trying to get OER listed and fulfilled, and then that we crafted a report out of that just is generally sort of some advice for you know, students, creators, OER creators, librarians, faculty, and administrators and bookstores themselves for how to smooth that process. So that's one thing. And then the next thing that we worked on is this tenure and promotion matrix, which we'll of course spend the rest of the time talking about. So this particular project is a collaboration between myself, Amanda, and Deep Shenoy, who some of you might know, who is a consultant in the OER space. So next slide. So we'd just like to ask you, what is your role at your institution? Just get a sense of who's in the room. Again, if you want to answer this question, you go to menti.com and then you use the code 17359543. Nice to see some faculty here today. And I know, it depends on the institution that you're at. With librarians, whether or not librarians are also tenure track, right? So at my institution at CUNY, all the librarians are tenure track, so are professors and therefore tenure track. So
I think there's actually even some cases where instructional designers are as well.
Oh,
yeah,
that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So I hope this is relevant to not just faculty today. Obviously, it will be relevant to everyone because if we're talking about sustaining OER, this is part of what we're doing here. Ooh, a mysterious other.
Yeah, if you want to share in the chat what your role is as other, that would be great. And otherwise, no pressure. Okay, so we'll leave this one. You're welcome to sort of add to it as we keep going if you want to add and put in your role later on.
So, I think we all know this to a certain degree, that recognizing OER work is valuable for the tenure promotion is a persistent conundrum. If you're on the listservs, LibOER or the CCC OER or any number of our OER listservs, you've seen these questions, right? About what do you have a policy? Do you have, has anybody out here used OER in their tenure promotion dossier? Is that, do you have examples, right? So I think there's, we know this, right? And I think we know this also about most things that are new or are about innovative teaching or any number of things, that trying to get that to value this new process or this innovative process and tenure promotion can be a bit of a struggle. So we also know that TMP process is very widely, right? So part of the how we came to what we're doing and what we're talking about today is that, in our pre-research for sort of figuring out how we were going to attack this problem, Amanda got us this large set of documents from a Scalcom lab at Simon Fraser in BC that had done a lot of collection of reappointment, tenure, promotion documents from all over North America, right? Mostly at research institutions, not quite totally R1s, but mostly sort of schools of large size. And so, I took a look through those, and I discovered what I confirmed what I already essentially knew to be true, which is that what counts for tenure promotion varies by school, right? What's going to count in an R1 might be different than what's going to count at a regional comprehensive, at a small liberal arts, or at a community college, right? They're all going to be slightly different. How things are weighted are going to be slightly different. But another thing that I discovered that I didn't quite totally expect was that even in individual schools, what counts per department could be wildly different, right? So there's going to be, in a hard science versus a social science versus a humanities, what's going to be valued is very different. What counts in a professional program is going to be different, right? And so, when we were thinking to ourselves, like, okay, how are we, when we do the doers work, when we're trying to get, deliverables out to people and give advice to folks, we're trying to say, there are a lot of organizations out here sort of trying to advocate for OER. So how do we use our systemness to really give people valuable information? So we were thinking, so what's our system level approach? And I think part of what we struggled with was, well, okay, we could do a like a model policy. We could do a model, sort of what we're calling a dear colleague letter, which would be like coming from a provost or a dean or a president that says you should be valuing OER. And I think we were a little loath to do that because I think most folks know, when administration starts to get involved in tenure promotion, either the faculty union or the faculty senate can get a little testy, and with good reason. So we backed off, I think, a little bit of that and decided to come to the matrix, which we'll elucidate more, which is much more of a sort of bottom up sort of thing, something to put in the hands of faculty and administrators and librarians and instructional designers and anybody who's working with OER faculty as a sort of tool for them to build their own language. So let's go forward.
So one of the things we started to do is we wanted to take a look at where did tenure in the academy actually originate? And it came in a statement in 1940. The statement is the principles of academic freedom and tenure. And the overall purpose of tenure is to ensure academic freedom and provide enough economic security to make the profession attractive. And one of the things when we think about to ensure academic freedom, a lot of OER advocates describe the choice of open education resources as a learning material or course material as something that you are able to do as a result of academic freedom. And so we wanted to take a look at that a little bit. And so one of the things we were very, as is we were very aware that really now is the time to revisit these longstanding questions on the types of faculty contributions and accomplishments that universities' tenure promotion systems reward and recognize. And one of the reasons for doing this is because so much of the open education work that is either done through creation, adoption, adaptation, or any of that work is done off the side of one's desk. And when we started, we know that, there's a few reasons why faculty choose not to use open educational resources. One is that sometimes it's hard for them to find, but the other reason is because it doesn't count towards their tenure and promotion process. So we wanted to bring to you this question is, have you added any OER contributions to your own tenure and promotion dossier?
And if you have, I think it would be great, when we get to Q&A, if you could just share, how you went through that process, or you can put it in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's 4. That's really great, actually. I would think 5.
5. Hey.
All
So
right.
I just want to address quickly what Jonathan put in the chat about the AAUP document, and the purpose of academic freedom is to serve the common good, right? I think, I think this goes into like a lot of sort of like dovetails quite nicely into a lot of the way that the folks talk about OER, right? Like that we're producing these things as the common good, right? And so I think, part of what, when I occasionally, right, when you're giving a presentation to faculty or especially from the administration side, maybe this doesn't happen to faculty on faculty conversations, but when you're talking about OER, sometimes you get this like pushback that's like, what about academic freedom, right? Like you can't just tell me to use OER. And so I like this point, Jonathan, that, so academic freedom has always been to serve the common good. We're serving the common good, right? We're still in this process. So, so again, like I was just sort of briefly saying, the matrix is one example, I think, how faculty can lead the evolution of tenure. I think, whenever, as I mentioned before, I think whenever there's like a new field, tenure has this sort of like very sort of like the TMP processes in general and policies are, they're not the most flexible things, right? And so you need language in which to sort of fit what you're doing into these sort of non-flexible categories, right? And so I have to think about, and so just to say that the quotes that we're using here are from a piece that I put in the chat that Amanda and have in Inside Higher Ed. It published a couple of days ago. And is also, we also published something for the New England Board of Higher Education that's a similar argument. But in this particular article, we bring up the idea, like the example of the digital humanities, right? 10, 15 years ago, brand new field within the humanities. But because of the way people were doing things, they're not producing monographs, right? They're not doing what might appear to be traditional or, journal-based, like peer-reviewed stuff. It was a struggle for some folks in that field to get that kind of stuff to count for tenure, right? And so, part of what they needed to do is they needed to produce a discourse around it. They needed to figure out different ways to measure things that could fit into the measurement sort of structures of tenure and promotion. And part of what we're trying to do with the OER matrix here is to give people ideas about what kind of metrics to use, ideas about how to sort of fit what they're doing into these traditional categories, right? And I think, to me, that's what we're trying to do is we're trying to give faculty the tools, right? Give faculty the power to do this kind of stuff themselves, and then therefore lead that culture change from the bottom up. I think, Amanda has said this before, and I love this term. It's sort of policy from the bottom up, right? And I think that's a really great way to think about it.
Well, thank you, Andy.
Yeah, no problem. So I think maybe we should just sort of transition into just showing folks the matrix.
Yep, I'm going to bring that up just now, just a second. So, sorry, let's see here. It's okay. This is not it. Just 1 second. So on the Doers website, which is doers3.org, it highlights both the description of the matrix, but then it also shows you what the matrix is. So as Andy mentioned early on, we were really careful about not creating some sort of like overall statement or overall policy that said, in order for tenure and promotion or open to be a part of tenure and promotion, you need to follow these particular steps, because there are no steps. Every institution has its own culture. We can't really identify that. But what we can do is help the faculty or the person who is applying for tenure and promotion to place their individual value, the value that they've contributed to open education, into their tenure dossier, so that then the institution will then place value on it, if that makes sense. So what we did is we took a look at the different ways in which you actually utilize open educational resources. So the first are open education practices as a whole. So adoption. So a contribution example might be you use OER in your class. What is the evidence that can be used to show the use of this? Well, we put in an example here. You could survey and collect data on how the use of OER affected student learning, and which of the three areas did this fit in. So one of the things that Andy was able to do when looking through all of the tenure and promotion documents, he identified that there's three main categories that people put their tenure and promotion evidence into. It's either research, teaching, or service. So we've done that here with the matrix, and then it identifies which area would you put this under. Another area we looked at was adaptation. So are you revising or remixing OER? Is there a way that you can, under evidence, could you provide evidence on what revised or remixed to best suit the learning outcomes? The next one was creation. So we took a look at how were you able to create? Is there an opportunity for peer review within your creation? And as you keep going down, we did areas of improving learning. What kind of contribution would that look like? One that I feel like many of you have probably taken part in is another area which we refer to as community. This might be mentoring others. This might be OER leadership. So are you a part of a committee? Do you do specific actions? Can you seek references or recommendation for this work? Or in particular, have you done workshops or webinars or presentations that are related to the open education work? And then again, if there's an opportunity for you to actually review any open educational resources, can you put that as a citation as well? So for example, at BC campus, we have open textbook collection at open.bccampus.ca, and you can actually peer review the works on there, and those are publicly available for others. And the University of Minnesota, or the Open Textbook Library, or I think they're Open Education Network now is what they're called. They also have peer reviews listed. Another area we wanted to take a look at was research lastly. So do you have any recommendations or any work contributions that are about scholarship of teaching and learning in OER? Are there grant writing that you might have done, or even conference presentations? So the idea of this whole matrix is really just to provide some sort of guidance, like a guidance document that you may be able to use and share within your own organization. Just going to go to the. So one of the questions we would like to know is, because each campus has a different way of doing tenure and promotion, are there things that you're, just as you take a look at this matrix, are there things that might look different to you, like ways that you would adapt this matrix that would maybe take a turn at your own institution?
Right, and I think it's, important to note that, of course, this is a CC BY document. It is meant to be adapted. It is meant to be, put into context. I'm still working on, I have a little working group at CUNY where we're trying to work on a CUNY specific one. This took us a while to develop the matrix, and, I think adapting is going to take a little while as well. Maybe some folks have things that they're already thinking about. So we would love to hear that. I also dropped just the link to the matrix itself in from the doers page into the chat, and then our article for NEBI, which also has, I think, a useful sort of addendum at the end, which is just what we've just sort of referred to in reference to sort of like software work, some user stories, right? So like we sort of put forward like, how would a faculty member use this? How would a administrator use this? How would a librarian use this? So
yeah,
I hope that's useful for folks.
Really good point that's come up here is we don't have a precedent of the matrix's efficacy in a real dossier evaluation yet, and that's correct. Yeah, and it's something that we're looking for.
So that we'll get to that in the end. Part of what we really want to be doing in next steps is collecting case studies, right? I'm already hearing from a variety of different groups, people are interested in it and they want to apply it, but we don't know how much application has actually happened yet, other than like excitement and thinking about it. But actual on the ground stuff, we don't have that.
And I think it should be noted too that the only institution that we are aware of that has actually brought in open education into their tenure and promotion process is the University of British Columbia. So there aren't, that's another thing is like, how do we infiltrate this particular process?
Right.
That hasn't necessarily been terribly open.
Yeah. And I feel like anecdotally, I'm hearing from, folks at my institution. Amanda and I had a conversation with some folks in Iowa. I was talking to my colleague Kevin from Connecticut, and evidently when our op-ed came out, the vice president for academic affairs for his system emailed him and was like, "Have you heard about this?" Which is very funny because Kevin was the leader of Doers for some time. So it seems like there, and what's happening at CUNY, which I think is very interesting, is there are folks who are really pushing for not just for OER, but a real sort of moment of saying, we've got to rethink tenure. We need to move things around. We need to at CUNY, they're calling it sort of the reimagining of the teacher-scholar model, right? So I think there's appetite at a variety of levels for a real rethinking of the tenure and promotion system. So I'm hoping that we get to be a part of this conversation.
And maybe this question, one of the things we've also been thinking about is, just as Andy is saying, he's looking at ways to actually adapt the matrix so that it's applicable to the CUNY faculty and association. I guess the question we'd like to know is, who would you actually need to involve in the adaptation of the matrix at your institution?
So for reference, what we're doing is, involving folks who are what we call our OER reps at our campuses, and involving faculty who are already OER folks who have either gone through the tenure promotion process or are about to. That's how we're doing it. We're, the way I think, depending on your institution, right, it totally varies as to, who's setting T&P policy, how specific is it? Are the departments left to, and I'm seeing a little bit in the chat that in a lot of places, the departments really have a pretty significant leeway, right? Within like a pretty abstract set of requirements, the departments can move around a lot. So in that sense, like if you're doing the matrix, maybe you don't really need to involve, let's say, upper level administration or your union or what have you, but it can be, really engaging with individual departments, right? It can be just engaging with faculty that you've worked with. So I think, again, it's going to depend on the institution, and your position within the institution, like how this would sort of play out.
Mm-hmm. Just gonna go.
Okay, so our next steps, we have a lot of ideas, and we're still sort of working out through what they are. So, on some feedback from folks as we've been going through this process. We've been thinking through this sort of idea of like an FAQ sheet, right? So like a companion document that could go with the matrix that would sort of say, how would you use this? What is its purpose? What are some things you need to think through when you're adapting it? But along with that FAQ sheet, I think what we're the most interested in is collecting case studies. So if you're super excited about this presentation and the matrix, and you go back to your home institution and you try and you start using it, we really want to hear about it, and we want to know how folks are using it, but we're also sort of continuing distribution, and just on the continuing distribution thing, and I'll stop after this, but I think what's been interesting to me as we've been distributing it, as we've been having conversations, is we've had a number of conversations with like upper level admin, like folks on boards of education, VPs of academic affairs, that sort of thing, and they're excited about it. So again, as we said, we did not intend for this to be like a thing for administrators to get super jazzed about and then sort of foist upon their charges. But in one of the conversations that Amanda and I had with some folks, somebody had this very nice metaphor of like, if we're going to change these things, we need a sandwich approach, right? From both the bottom up and the top down. And so I do think it'll be interesting as we go forward to see for us, so what is the uptake? Are we really getting what we thought we were going to do, which was, faculty using this and sort of empowering themselves and therefore and then changing the process from the bottom up? Or is it going to also maybe even more appeal to the top-down model, even though that's not what we intended? You can only control your ideas so far. So, okay, so that's all I have. Thanks so much. If you want to reach out to us, feel free. My email is just andrew.mckinney@cuny.edu. I'll drop it in the chat. If you have any questions, and then if anybody has any questions, comments, concerns, case studies, if you used OER in your tenure promotion packet, feel free to speak up and share what worked for you, what didn't.
Yeah, maybe we just open it up for questions or comments. Oh,
Jonathan.
Jonathan.
Can I just, I think this is super, this matrix is fantastic. And I've just shared it by email to a bunch of my colleagues. My concern is that, I think I was the one who raised in chat that this varies a lot from department to department. And I don't think that's something that we want to steamroll over. I mean, the standards, I'm a mathematician. We alphabetize the order of author names in scholarly papers. In other disciplines, the order of the names on a paper is highly significant. And in lots of places, being a first author on a paper, it counts more than being a second author. In math, it doesn't. And those are the kind of things that departments know and that administrations don't, and we can't have a one size fits all. I wonder, I'm trying to wrap my head around what the game plan is when there's, it seems to me like we have to win this battle over and over and over with every single tenure committee in every single department, every single institution. Am I being too pessimistic? Is there a strategy to avoid that?
No, I think that's exactly what we recognize too, is that there's no one size fits all. And so it has to be based upon either your department, probably from the granular level, and then kind of breaking it up, right? But I think the important thing here is if your department as a math department can put the value of the work that's happening in the open education resource work, then that signifies to other faculty that, it's quote unquote okay to move forward with this.
Right. I like to think it kind of like as a sort of snowball effect a little bit, right? Where, initially the battle is going to be small and slow, and it might be department to department. But this is my thing about the case studies, right? And people's questions on the listservs and, questions at, conferences about this kind of stuff is as if we build examples, right? And we're able to build, multiple examples in multiple different disciplines, then I think the reinventing of the wheel for every department doesn't have to happen as much. Right. And by the time we get the snowball rolls downhill, it's big enough to steamroll everybody, to have enough examples where if you're at, any given type of institution, any given type of department, there will be something in that sort of bank of case studies that will be relevant, that'll help you do what you need to do faster. Right. So to a certain degree, I feel like, we're at the beginning stages, and yeah, it's going to be tough. It's going to take a lot of individuals doing this, but part of OER, right, and part of the internet is a little bit of crowdsourcing and trying to crowdsource these examples and make those into a critical mass enough to where it becomes an easier sort of thing. That's my 2-bit dollar store theory of change I just threw in here, so we'll try that. Julian, you turned your camera on. Do you have a question?
No, I more have a comment.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I was one that also mentioned that by departments, this is always a question. I'm at Michigan State University in the College of Arts and Letters, and while I have tenure, I'm a full professor. I did incorporate OER work in my annual review letter, in part because if you don't put it in, if someone like me doesn't put it in, it just sort of slips through the cracks. The challenge, I think, and we have an OER group that Regina, sort of co-lead, a very sort of vigorous, I would argue, very vigorous OER program. And I did an OER book as a part of another sort of DH project. And since I am in digital humanities, and previously I did a lot of work in community engagement. And the reason I mentioned that is because each one of those fields is a place where people don't know how to talk about it in tenure promotion. Right? It gets misrepresented, mischaracterized. Right. And the nature of that misrepresentation becomes is more dire earlier in the tenure process, right? When you're going up, when you're an assistant, you're trying to make a case, the way around how these things are being understood, that is a real challenge. And so one of the things that I learned from doing community engagement work is to sort of recognize the ways that work intersects with a quote unquote more traditionally understood tenure and promotion language and structures, right? Some of it has to do with the structures. And I think that when you're thinking about this, because I think every institution has the same problem, tenure and promotion is written at the department level. And they're very particular about these things. Like they say things like, if you don't publish in particular journals
Right.
that are associated with the field, you didn't publish, which of course, if you're doing something interdisciplinary, you end up publishing in a place that's not quote unquote associated with the field. And so, you know, you're always sort of caught in a narrativizing framework. And I think there are a number of different techniques that stretch across these sort of like spaces that I'm in. One is peer review, and how that's achieved is an important one. I thought it was important. I thought you made a good point about peer review. Sometimes that peer review is exactly a peer, you know, working with, you know, registering yourself as a peer reviewer at something like, you know, one of the big OER repositories or something like that, and like, you know, putting your stuff there so it can be reviewed. But I also think it's important to recognize that another kind of peer review is like grants and awards. And if you're doing something related to a particular set of questions and fields, there's some community that's very that cares about that, and if you can engage with that, and that for me was always an important part of helping to make the case, because ultimately all tenure and promotion cases are arguments, right?
Right.
Yes, we like to pretend that they're this sort of like static things, but they're actually kind of arguments, and they get more argumentative as you go further up the chain, right? Like assistant, it's a little bit clear, associates, a little bit more hazy, full professor, it's completely opaque. Like it's completely like, oh, well, you know, any number of things can throw it off kilter. And so I think creating some hard moments of intersection that looks like something that someone who doesn't understand the work can see that it reflects is always very important. And that's just my opinion. I think that does matter, especially in an R1 institution, however, that if you can create these sort of moments of intersection where there's clarity around the work that you're doing, it's super helpful.
Yeah, I love everything you're saying. And I think, you know, that's part of what we were trying to do, like, is get this, like these points of intersections, like get these points of, like I like to think of it like as commensurability, right? Like between two things, you know, and also, you know, that's, I love that you're working in DH because, and that's, I think that's a really important example for OER. And I think I love that you brought up interdisciplinarity too. Like that is not one that I had really thought through yet, because that, you know, that's an old fight as well, right? Of allowing for us to be, you know, across disciplines and not to let sort of very narrow disciplines decide what tenure and promotion equals, right? And so part of, speaking of disciplines, part of what we've thought through a lot, and I think what we want to sort of move forward as next steps as well, is to start going to disciplinary societies and say, you know, look, you know, there are folks, you know, in math, in English, in history, in bio, who are doing really important OER work. That these are people who are part of your discipline, right? And so, you know, and we're growing in those disciplines. So these disciplines need to start thinking through that thing. But you know, when I feel like it was in another conference, Amanda, that somebody brought up the DH thing first, or it might have been in another conversation. But because, you know, I've worked around DH folks a lot over the last 10 years in my career, and you know, I think it was really interesting to see like it gain legitimacy, right? And really go through from a burgeoning field to a legitimacy thing. And that's sort of like what I'm looking for OER. Like I want to see, you're maybe laughing because maybe people don't think it's legitimate yet, but
well,
maybe that's premature.
I think it's complicated. I think,
yeah.
I mean, it's ironic. My OER was about digital humanities, right? Like, because it was a way for me to. It was part of a digital humanities project.
Yeah.
And, I was lucky enough to get support from the OER program at the library. But one of the things about that conversation in terms of creating that, like I had a series of questions I asked myself, because it's only getting digital humanities isn't very clear sometimes.
Yeah, right,
where
right,
it
right.
sits, right?
Yeah.
And it really does become a question of what are the experiences of other people in the spaces that you're in. One very important sort of caveat that is very important. I think it's very important when you're working in like sort of in the transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary spaces. Are you engaged with your people at your institution, which is often very complicated? And then are you engaged with people through some sort of association? And so one of the things about DH that's very interesting is that it's only been, because I'm a historian by training, it's only really been in the last 7 or 8 years that like an actual white paper has been produced by the association, American Historical Association, detailing what to do in terms of promotion for someone who does DA. MLA is the same way. It's all happened within the last decade, right? How long people been talking about digital humanities, right?
Yeah.
So it's like we say, oh, it's just like DA. I'm like, oh, well.
That's fair. All right, Regina.
Yeah, thank you, Julian, for sharing your thoughts on that. I just wanted to I wish one of our professors are here. They're probably in another session, but I can say that one of our OER creators, so he is a professor in our linguistics and language department who created the basic Hindi OER, and also another professor who created the elementary Arabic. So, and another professor who created an OER in partnership with her students. So it is a student created OER that she helped publish, with the students, and it all went into their tenure and promotion packet, or their annual evaluation. And so I think this is just my sense. There's nothing that prevents a faculty from including those work that they have done with OER, in their PNP packet. And certainly in their annual evaluation, and they articulated it in a way that demonstrates the impact. For example, how many professors have adopted it? Not just in out of state, but also internationally, given that it's a language learning OER. So the impact or the alternative metrics that we in the library world are like recognizing now should be put in the forefront more than just the impact factor, right? And so I think it also is part of how an OER creator, a faculty, articulates that value and make that value understandable to the powers that be, right? Or to their colleagues who might not understand the value of OER.
The metrics thing I think is super important here. I'm actually curious, Regina, how were they tracking downloads or impact? Like, where was that coming from? Like the institutional repository or from like another source?
It's not like the metrics, that we are used to in the library, like, okay, number of downloads. It's more on, we don't track that yet. Okay. So we have a Pressbooks publishing platform, and, we put in Google Analytics in there. But it's more of like, oh, this person, this professor from X university, X community college, from whatever country or state it is, told me, that they are using it and how it impacted them as they teach the same course to their students. Right. And I think that testimony by a peer, right, is very important. So yeah, that is what they include.
Cool. I think that's something that, like, if folks are adapting the matrix, that's like an evidence thing. I think that would work quite well. That, it's not only is it, its impact, but it's also peer review, right? It's also like another faculty member using your thing and sort of fitting like a letter in there or a statement in the dossier, I think works. And you know, I think that that's something that we could fit in the matrix, right? To say like, this is a viable way to do this. So that's great. And, you know, it's interesting. I think what's, you know, we're all digital, right? Like most of what we're doing in OER is digital. And so I think people just kind of assume that we have like the ability to track downloads and track, you know, where things have come from. You know, in CUNY, we have an institutional repository where we've asked folks to put their OER like deliverables, right? Whether that be a syllabus or a piece of a chapter or a book. And so that gives us, you know, downloads and gives you like a little map like you would get like from Google Analytics or whatever. But you know, I don't know how I maybe the sort of more anecdotal like testimonial stuff is more powerful to a tenure promotion committee. I think it probably depends on the department, right, and whoever's on the committee. But I think that this is a really, I think, an important conversation to be having, and an important sort of distinctions to be had about how do we measure impact at this point.
We've got just about 3 minutes left, so I just wanted to kind of step in for a second and
I'm laughing
say
at Jonathan's last comment. So
what a great great conversation, really great topic. I'm K-12, so as I'm listening to everybody talk, I'm thinking, I just tell everybody in K-12 that they get bombarded by sales folks from all of our textbook companies. And so I'm the salesperson for OER. And it sounds like that's what you guys are kind of against a little. You have to be your own salespeople for the OER stuff at the higher ed level. So I kind of made that connection just a little bit. So for those of you that are left, if I know Andrew left his email in the chat. If you'd like a copy of the chat, I believe you can go down there and click those 3 buttons next to it and save the chat, so that then you've got a whole transcript and it includes his email address. So I'll give you just a second to do that right now. And oh, there's Amanda's too. So sounds great. What a great topic. I just want to thank you. I do invite everybody to join us at 1:15 for the lunch and network session. So go grab a couple bites to eat and bring it with you. You can eat and talk at the same time. Had some really great conversations yesterday. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference and our summit this afternoon as well.